So I want to ask you a question tonight as I start, and this is coming to you from the Sportcology Institute. Sportcology is a word I invented, and the word means the study of the science and math of sport and how it affects life. And I built this way back when I started ski racing to understand what we were really doing and why we were really doing it. And I've kept journals ever since I was 12 years of age, and I've really turned everything that I've done into research. And so I use the term Sportcology Institute because it's here to design to help provide research information for people and at the same time to teach from it. And I would be remiss if I didn't start tonight by first of all asking you to do one thing. Pick up your cell phone, and you've got my number, 403-461-9463, and ask yourself this question, and I'm going to pause and give you a 30 seconds to answer. And I want the first things that come into your mind. What do you need most to be your best? What is it that you need most to be your best? And if you've got 1 to 3 answers, that's all I need. Just text them to me, and I'm going to come back to it later in the presentation. And then the second question is, what do you need in your athletes to be their best? And the same thing, just 1 to 3 answers. And you can either email them or text them to me on those numbers or on my email address. I happen to believe that this is the greatest time to be in sport. And I'll tell you why. Sport is the last arena where we are expected to play fair, play clean, and be the best that we can possibly be. We must be the best of the best. And I say that because in every other arena, there is always room to bend the rules. But in sport, we don't allow that. In sport, if you step on a line like the relay team did in London in 2012, they get disqualified. I don't know if you know this, but in 2012 in badminton, there were 2 teams, one from China, one from Korea, that on purpose lost games so that they could end up playing in a different section of the qualifying and then end up coming in through the back door so that the 2 of them could end up playing each other in the final. And they were eventually disqualified by the sport governing body. We check every athlete to make sure that they are clean. And so we demand that, and we're living in a culture today where in our culture there's a difficulty with the fact that most people are willing to make more compromises than they are to make the rules stay as they are. And it's going to be increasingly harder, and your job as a coach is going to get more difficult. In 1964, the 4-man bobsleigh team of John and Vic Emery and Peter Kirby and Doug Anakin were, after the 3rd run in the 4-man bobsled, in first place, but they broke an axle and had no spare axle. And the Italian champion, Eugenio Monti, saw what was happening and took off his axle and ran up to the start of the bobsleigh track where they were about to be disqualified because they couldn't get in the start in time. And he gave him his axle, they put it on, and they went down and won the gold medal. And the Canadian team took it off and put it back on Eugenio Monti's sled, and the Canadians won the gold. And Eugenio Monti won the Spirit of the Olympics award, which they only give out to those athletes that perform with integrity. And I teach the character qualities of a champion to my athletes. I teach them what it takes, and that is my priority. I do not teach skills. I don't teach anything to do with technique or process. And a lot of parents send me their kids and then ask me if I will take the kids that are non-athletes because of the change that we make in the athletes, because we teach them the character qualities of a champion by balancing everything we do with what we call emotional balance. I know that term is now called emotional intelligence, but a lot of people don't even know what that means yet. And so I call it a simpler thing, emotional balance. What has changed since you were in the arena? Think back to when you were competing and how different it is today. If I look on the screen here and I see each one of you, I can see that each one of you is of the age that when you would go and do your sport, there would be dozens of kids participating in throw together games, throw together participation, and you would just go out and have a great time. And that doesn't happen anymore today. It doesn't even exist. There is no more outdoor rinks. There's no more outdoor facilities. So it's very difficult to find that type of performance opportunity anymore. And I want to tell you the difference between our age when we were kids and today. Fathers spent an average of 4 hours and 47 minutes a day with their children. Post Second World War, when fathers came home from the Second World War and during the 50s, the typical father would spend that much time. Now, they weren't doing sports all the time. Sometimes they're doing homework, sometimes they're doing hobbies, sometimes they're in the garage, sometimes they're around the house, but they were always with them. The latest results from Barna show that the average father today only spends 8 seconds a day with their child in teaching them life lessons. So it's a massive difference between when you and I were kids and the kids today that you're coaching and the kids you're working with. Most kids come from situations where there's multiple families, multiple parents, and so the parents spend all their time trying to be their child's best friend. They aren't trying to teach their child life lessons, because if they start to discipline them or teach them anything, then it becomes very difficult, because now they're not the friend anymore, because the other parent, all they have to do is buy them a new cell phone or buy them a new computer or get them a different whatever. And next thing you know, that parent is the winning parent, and the other one that wants to teach him something, he gets left behind. We know from our research that dads spend between the age of 0 and 18 the equivalent of 1 year of time teaching life lessons. Mothers spend 4.5 years in 18 years with their children teaching them life lessons, because most parents work and they're not at home. And amazingly enough, teachers spend more time with students and with kids than anybody else. And right behind that are coaches or teachers that do extracurricular activities. So you as a coach are a vital link. You are vital to the development and growth of a child. And so I have to ask you this question. Is sport in Canada, in North America, maybe around the world, I think, is it based on a professional sports model, or is it growth and development? If you actually look at the way we do sport, it's all based on a professional sports model, and there is very little growth and development. We know that because the average child that plays hockey from age 6 to 18 only skates in any practice, in any game, 11 to 14 minutes. That is the average in Canada. And we also know that the average kid only has a puck on his stick 8 seconds per practice per game. So when we say that hockey is, for example, growth and development, or when we look at a skier like my sport and you say, well, I was up on the hill all day today, the actual time that a kid is skiing is only 42 minutes. And with the coach, it's only 6 minutes per day. So when you say growth and development, you have to ask yourself, was Malcolm Gladwell just trying to put together a great theory when he said 10,000 hours? Or did he really know what he was talking about? I happened to chase him down and got a hold of him in New York and asked him what he based that on. I said, where did you come up with that 10,000 hours? And he says, oh, I got that from Hockey Canada. And I said, what did they say? And they said, well, they take the number of games, number of practices, they take the number of length of those games and practices, and they multiply it up and they say 10,000 hours. Well, I can tell you from the kids I've coached for the last 20 years, none of them could ever get to 10,000 hours. Yet we have parents that chase this elusive idea that if they get more ice time, their child will be better. And the fact of the matter is what we found and what we teach is that it's what you do when you're on the ice, and it's what you're thinking about and what your purpose is on that ice that makes all the difference and changes. Now, I want to take us back so that you can understand why I believe this so strongly. How do you come from Shaunavon, Saskatchewan? Yes, Haley Wickenheiser's home. I'm much more famous than she is out of Shaunavon, but nobody knows that. How do you come from Saskatchewan to become an Olympic medalist in 6.5 years? And so, Wally, if you don't mind, for a minute, I'm going to take them back and just give them a little bit of background on me, because most people don't know it. Prior to the age of 10, I was the smartest kid in Saskatchewan, and I took grade 3 and 4 in 1 year and 5 and 6 in 1 year. That year, when I was 10 years of age, I played a 28-game season and scored over 200 goals. As a matter of fact, the coaches would beg my coach not to play me in the third period so somebody else could have the puck. And my dad thought I was going to be an NHL hockey player. We had an Olympic-sized rink between the house and the barn. Dad would wake us up at 4:30 in the morning with our gear already on. We were already dressed in our hockey gear. And he would put a hockey stick in one hand and a hot chocolate in the other hand. He would turn the lights on the rink, and we would skate till 6 o'clock. And then we would put our skate guards on, put our stick down and our hot chocolate cup down, and we would go milk 80 cows by hand. And it made for a great wrist shot, because if you're milking 80 cows by hand, you build a grip that is unbelievable. And I always said that if you want to be a great hockey player, just buy your kid a milk cow and have them milk it twice a day. On June 21st of 1963, I was fooling around with my brother and unfortunately had an accident, crashed into a cement floor from a very high ceiling and crushed my head, and ended up in a coma, a severe coma for over 3 months. The recovery took 15 months. I was alone most of that time. And while I was alone, I came across a book that my mother brought me from the library, which was mixed in with kids' books. That's the only reason it got there. And the book was called Wake Up and Live by Dorothea Brande. It was written in 1931, so if you try to find it, it's a very old book. And when I read this book, Wake Up and Live, I started to wake up in the hospital and realize that if I was ever going to do anything, I had to really renegotiate my whole life, because everybody that came to visit me would say, "Oh, Mark," and which is my real name. Jim is a pseudonym, or it's a nickname that I got from a reporter. And they would say, "Mark, it's so sad you won't be able to play hockey anymore. Oh, Mark, it's so sad that you won't be able to go to school anymore." And the reason why they would say this is because I was mentally handicapped. When I went back to school, I only got 1 week of school, and there was so much rejection and so much bullying that there was no chance the school board was ever going to let me go back to school. And they told my father and mother that the best he could hope for was maybe to have me work on the farm and become a farm boy. And my parents were shattered. And understand this, that they were not trained in how to deal with emotionally angry, frustrated child. Because I still knew what I once was, and I would hear it, but I couldn't even think of getting there. And then think about this. There were no mountains, no history in skiing, no coach, and anybody that we ran into when we talked about ski racing or becoming a ski racer would say there is no chance. What keeps you going when you're not the one? What keeps the kids you have that you work with that are not the stars? What do you look for? It isn't mental training. It isn't physical training. It isn't technical skill. It isn't even hockey sense, even though all of those are valuable. It's the fact of what kind of emotional balance does that child have, and what kind of character have they developed as a result of it. I wasn't the one. I wasn't going to be the one, and nobody even thought I would be the one. I was mentally slow. I was failing at education. I was socially awkward. And the school said, no room for your kind here. I'm mad. I'm not only mad, but I'm not what I was. And I'd become very emotional. I was literally Humpty Dumpty, broken and out of control. My mother, she used to say what I was, and eventually I found a right acronym or a right way to look at it. And I really was a kid that was ADHD on steroids. That's how out of control I was. My parents didn't drug me. They didn't put me away. I like to say that my parents were smart enough to corral me. And when they corralled me, they put me within a barrier or around me that really stopped me from being able to do anything without learning to control my emotions and direct them towards something profitable, something positive, and something progressive. Some friends of ours, the Chandlers, left a whole bunch of sports equipment behind, and in that was some skis and boots that were for adults, and we would stuff newspapers in the toe, and I would wrap the rope around the saddle of the saddle horse, and my older brother would ride the horse, and I would hang onto the rope and go up and down the lane, and I would say, that's too slow, get the half-ton truck. And so we'd get the half-ton truck, and we'd go up and down the lane, and I'd say, let's go in the ditch, and we'd go down the ditch about a mile, turn around and come back, and I'd be yelling all the time to my brother and to my dad, faster, faster, faster. My older and younger brother weren't even interested. They went back on the ice. We went over to Ammons Hill, which is about 8 miles west of us in the foothills of the Cypress Hills. And we would go up and down there all day on Saturdays and Sundays. And Dad was so excited about the fact that I seemed to be coming alive that he says, let's celebrate the fact that Jim is back from the dead. And so we went to Whitefish, Montana. And the third day there, I came to the bottom and a ski patrol grabbed me, and I wore a gold Bell Star helmet to protect my head. Now, I can tell you I was the only guy on the ski hill wearing a helmet. And I had to wear this because the doctor said if he's going to ski, he's got to wear this helmet. And he grabbed me from behind, and I lost my balance and hit him in the nose and broke his nose with my helmet as I fell backwards. And he was bleeding all over and hanging on to me at the same time. And the head of the ski school came over, and he sent him on his way. And he said, by the way, why were you going to take his lift ticket? And he said, because he was going to kill himself or somebody else. I like to look at this as the way I look at every kid. You see, some people just see a problem and others see potential. And this guy, Len Kaufman is his name. He was the head of the ski school for the longest period of time in Whitefish. He ran their racing program, took me aside and said, I need to talk to your father. They had a little chat when we found my dad, and we made a couple of runs. And that night, my dad and him talked till 3 a.m. And my father was protecting me and didn't want to tell him we were Canadians. He didn't want to tell him where we were from. He just wanted to find out what this guy was saying. And he was saying, the 72 Olympics will be in Banff because Banff is going to win the bid. And your son should be in those Olympics, and I can get him there. All the way home, my dad thought about this. And when we got home, he said, boys, you milk the cows tonight. Mom and I are going to talk. And they came out as we finished milking, and Dad turned to me and he said, son, which is easier, moving a mountain to Saskatchewan or moving you to the mountains? And I said, Dad, that's a ridiculous question, because it would take a lifetime to move a mountain to Saskatchewan, but you can move there in one day. And by the time you moved a mountain here, you'd be too old to enjoy it. He packed us up and he moved us to Calgary. And he packed my mom and I up. He didn't take us all. He just packed my mom and I up. And we moved to Calgary. And my dad said, if you're going to be a ski racer, you're going to have to pay for it all yourself by working on the farm. And he literally made me have budgets and pay him and coaches and everybody who gave me a ride to the hill. And he said, if you don't improve every week, I'm pulling the plug. My father never saw me race until after the 72 Olympics, and only because they held a World Cup race in Mount Norquay in Banff, Alberta. He refused to go to the ski hill. He refused to watch me because he was so broken that I wasn't going to play hockey anymore. I quit playing hockey because of the coaches that I had and the relationship I had with my father. My dad had priorities, and he said, I don't care what you do as long as the 8 priorities that we have are not disturbed. So whatever you do after those 8 priorities, you can do whatever you want, but don't let it interfere with our family plan. I knew the Olympics were 6.5 years away. And I knew based on the way my dad taught me math that it was 5 months. And I knew that if I was ever going to get there in 5 months to the Olympic Games in 312 days, then I had to figure out how to ski my maximum in those 312 days. You say, how do I arrive at that? 6.5 years is not 312 days. Well, most of you probably don't use the same math my dad used and I used. You see, every one of us sleeps 8 hours a day, and so we can't say we're going to use that time. And every one of us has to work 8 hours a day, so we lose 2/3 of every day. And then if you start to add up the time it takes to eat, the time it takes to bath, the time it takes to drive to and from, the time it takes to go to work, everything that you have to do in between, we're lucky if we get 8 hours. But see, on the farm, we grew up learning the value of time and what time really was. And so I had to figure out a way to make sure that my dad didn't pull the plug. And you talk about pressure. I mean, it was enormous pressure. So where did the character come from and how can you apply it to your teams? My dad had quotes. He would say, you'll be tomorrow what you are today, only more so. Or he'd say, the strongest thing in your life is what you're looking at. Or, and this is the one that applies most to this presentation, you can have the skill and you can have the will, but if you don't have the fill, it'll never fit the bill. And the fill is what I teach, because I have found of the 1,013 kids that I've coached, that those who didn't have any fill never progressed very far. But those that would pursue the fill would excel beyond those who had skill and will. If you want to know what my dad was like and how tough it was, the first day of school you came home at 6 years of age, he met you at the end of the lane when you got off the bus. He handed you a pair of overalls. He gave you a little booklet that you stick in your pocket. He gave you a pen and he gave you a wristwatch. And he said, son, now that you're old enough to go into the world 8 hours a day all by yourself, you are going to have to pay your own way from this day forward. I will put a roof over your head. I will feed you 3 meals a day, but everything else you will do on the farm as it's appropriate for you for the time that it is, and I will pay you, and you will pay your own taxes, and you will pay for your own skates. You will pay for your own camps. You will pay me to take you to the hockey rink. You will pay me to wait for you to finish practice in a game. That's the way he raised us. He always just, I used to say to him, why this way, Dad? And he would say, should something happen to us, I need to know that you are able to take care of yourself by the time you're able to reproduce another human being. So his intention was to teach us everything that we needed by the time we reached puberty. The lesson that he taught me the most about character and where I teach from is he would take me out to the bins and he would say, let's gather some seeds for seeding next year. And we would take them back and put them in a Pyrex dish over top of the oven in a wet cloth, and we would put them in rows of 10 rows of 10, 100 seeds from every bin, and the sprouting of each one of those seeds, the best bin was the ones we seeded our seeds from. And then he would teach you about the seed. He would teach you that the seed never complained. It never quit. It never gave up. It sacrifices its own life to produce 300 seeds for everybody else. It never asks for a weekend off. It never goes to a party. It never gets drunk. And it's buried in black cold, wet soil. The seed grows daily. And if you know anything about farming, which I grew up doing it, I know that there is a name for every day that the seed is growing, all for the benefit of others. Sometimes he would take us out and take a straight side spade and clear the dirt away, and you could see the roots, and he would say, son, those roots only go after what they need, not what they want. And until your needs become what you want, your wants can never become your needs. Never, ever do they ever quit. They give all that they have. Well, the spring that I was 10 before the accident, he took me out and I got on the tractor with the drills, the 14-foot set of drills. And he said, this is my favorite field. You're going to seed it. And so I knew how to drive the tractor. I had learned since I was 6. I sat on his lap. I got to the place where he could sit next to me. And then finally I could drive it. And I knew everything that I had to do. And he parked the truck at the end of the field. And he said, I'll be back when it's time to fill them. And I went back and forth at 4 miles an hour, 3.5 days on the same 160-acre field, going back and forth, 93 passes. I finished seeding. He said, let's go to the next one. I thought I was done. Ended up that year doing all the seeding. About 4 weeks later, he woke me up before the sun got up. We went out to the west side of that field so that we could see the sunrise on the east end of the field a mile away. And we got out at the north end and we started walking across the west side of the field. And he would point out rocks, he would point out weeds, he would say, pick those rocks, carry them off the field, and he would tell you how much that rock would cost him in hindering production. And he would talk about the seeds and how they would steal and how those things are what steals it from our own life. And he would go through this whole process of teaching you again and again and again and again. And when we got to the south end, after walking 1/4 mile, he said, there's a big rock here, take it to the rock pile. And so I picked it up and carried it to the rock pile. And when I came back, my father was down on both knees. And I said, are you okay, Dad? As I ran up behind him. And he says, I'm fine. And I came around to the front of him and the tears were streaming down his face. And I said, are you okay? He said, yes. He put his hands on my shoulders and he looked up at me and he said, son, do you realize that 10 years of age, you can do what I can do? Do you realize that you have so much potential that you can do what I can do? That you can be so great if you will do the same as the seed. And that is this, is that the seed has everything it needs within it, but a human being has to be trained, has to be disciplined, and you have to do all the things that we've tried to teach you. I learned the alphabet by learning the character qualities of a champion. He would say, A is for the author of your life. You are the authority of authoring your life. B is believe, and belief, and believed. And until you come to the place where you believed what you believe, then you don't really believe it. And he said, don't be deceived, because the word believe contains right in the middle of it the word lie. And you have to remember that every human being believes the lies they tell themselves. And until you tell yourself the truth, which is the T in our alphabet, until you do that, and he would hold up his hands like this, and he would say, the letter U is a cup, and what flows out of you is who you are. And he said, son, I am so proud of you. You can do what I can do. You can do anything you desire to do if you're willing to be the author, to believe, to have confidence, to know what the real meaning of the word confidence is. It's not what's in the dictionary, by the way. It's the real meaning of the word confidence. And I knew what it was because he would teach it to us all the time. I can tell you, gentlemen, from that moment to today, the only thing I aspired to was that type of feeling, that emotion, that driving force inside of me. So who can grasp this? Well, I've trained 1,013 kids and I've tested 1,013 kids. I've kept the statistics on them. None of those kids that ever came here, except for one, the only one that ever came here that was already prepared well enough to be doing what she was doing, was Haley Wickenheiser. But the other 1,012 were never fit enough, never strong enough, never prepared enough. And in pressure, in emotional moments, they would break and I would have to rebuild them. And I knew that I had to rebuild them emotionally. Until I reached them, until I reached that child emotionally, I had to do all the work. I had to keep on pushing them. I had to keep on helping them. But when we suddenly would turn the light on and we would reach them inside, I would become their cheerleader and I had to hold them back. I've had players go from nowhere to the NHL. I would say that the majority of the kids I worked with started at community level 5 and ended up playing AAA. I've had athletes that gone from unknown to world champions. And I've had athletes that were invited to try out for the top teams in the world and compete at the Olympic Games. And as a result, those athletes would go to those teams. The coach would see this incredible difference in this child who last year was just a third line player or a fourth line player in their mind, and all of a sudden was the leader on the ice. And they would come and say, we're going into the playoffs. We don't seem to have the right momentum. We don't seem to have the right attitude. Can you help me? And I tried to think about, how do I reach them the way my father reached me? How do I reach them? What can I do in 1 hour after a practice? How can I reach them? The biggest challenge I had was when I would go with teams and ask them to let me work with them, I would invite the parents and the kids to come, and I had a strategy, and I would look across the room and I would notice that if it was a practice, only the moms attended. And if it was a game, it was mostly the dads that attended. If I held a 5-week or a 5-day seminar, the first one, 90% of the moms were there. The second one, 80% of the dads were there. The third one, it was 50-50. The fourth one, 80% was dads. And the fifth one, the last one, would be 60-40, plus their brothers, friends, and their friends' dads. And I said, how am I going to teach this? And then suddenly it hit me. I know what to do. So what I would do is put the parents at one end and the kids in the middle with a circle of chairs with the coaches behind them. And I would say to the parents, you need to write a letter to your son. And this was for the father. As a father, I want you to write what you enjoy in watching him. And you've got to do it in 1 line or 1 paragraph, not a full page. And for the mothers, I want you to express the emotions you feel when you watch your son or daughter play. And then I would put the kids in a circle and they would sit down, and I would have done some prep work with the coach. I knew which athletes had good mindsets, which ones were positive. And I would ask each one of the kids as they sat in a player or in a circle, as a player, what is it that you bring to the game? What is it that you are all about? What is it that you can do? And most kids wouldn't answer. They would just sit there because they don't want to be the first guy. And so I knew which guy to point to, and I would point to him and I would say, if I were to ask these 15 other players what they would say about you, what would it be? And before I could even go, what would it be? The other kids would be yelling out, oh, he's got a great shot. He's got a great shot. And I would say, what's your name? And he might say, Gary. And I would say, okay, from now on, your name is Great Shot Gary. And I might go to another guy and I would point to him and I would say, what would they say about you? And they would say, oh, I'm great on the blue line. And I would say, okay, you're Blue Line Barry. And we would go through all 16 kids and identify a new identity in them. You see, I have worked with enough kids to know that when they come to train with me, they have a preconceived idea about the way they see themselves and the way they think other people see them and the way the coaches they've had have seen them. And if I don't change their identity, if I don't change who they are inside, then they can never have the integrity to believe that they can be the best they can be. And so we would go around the circle while the parents are writing the letters. The coaches had been given instruction to go write one line about each one of those players. And we would get them to point to each player themselves once they all had a nickname, and the kid had to accept that nickname. We didn't ever give a nickname to a kid who didn't want it. And some of them would choose their own nicknames, and it might have nothing to do with that. But when they would choose their own nickname, they all of a sudden, you would see them sit up straight. You'd see them smile. You'd see them all of a sudden push themselves up in the chair and look like they wanted to play the game. And I knew that the switch had gone on. And I would say, for the rest of the playoffs, I want all of you to call each other by those nicknames. Because you need him. You need him. You need that guy. You need the goalie. He's Brick Wall Barry. Or whatever the nickname was. And you would see these athletes brighten up and sit up and all of a sudden believe that they had something to contribute. Once everyone was named and they were excited about their nickname, we would have the kids go sit with their parents, and their parents had to read their letters to their sons. And when they would read the letter to their sons, there'd be a lot of tears. There'd be a lot of I'm sorry. There'd be a lot of hugging. And then the coaches would come in and they would write what they felt in one line to each one of those kids. And they would have to stand in front of those kids and say that one line of, I look forward to watching you because this team needs your hands. This team needs your speed. This team needs your shot. This team needs you on the blue line. The motivation and the enthusiasm that this presentation would end with would carry these kids in most cases. I remember the one that I like telling the most was this team that was 1-11 when the coach came and asked me to help. I sat down with him. I listened. I watched his practice. We did this exercise. The next March, I get a phone call and I can hear all these kids screaming in the background. And he goes, Jungle, Jungle, it's Daryl. And I'm going, Daryl who? And he says, Daryl, you know, the hockey team. And then suddenly it clicked. And I said, what are you doing? And he says, we just won the city championships. And he said, the boys wanted me to call you because you made a difference. You changed us. You changed the way we see each other. You changed the way we perform. So let me ask you, when should you learn this? Ideally, you should learn it at home. Ideally, parents should have stories to teach lessons the way my dad did, the way my mom did. My mom was just as vital and just as much a part. Tony Dungy has this on his draft day sheets, and they have players that they put these letters on, DNDC. It means do not draft because of character. And they would only draft players that had character. What is time? Time is not a way we measure the length of a game or the distance that somebody ran. Time is the measure of change. And you are either going toward where you need to go or away from where you need to go. And until you have character that will check yourself and ask yourself, what do I need to do? See, I knew on any given weekend when I started ski racing at 12 that I was only going to get 15 weekends, 30 days in one winter to ski. And my dad had said, if I don't improve every week, he's going to pull the plug. So I was used to getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I would get up at 4:30 and ride my bike down to Northmount Boulevard and McKnight Boulevard, where McKnight is now. McKnight wasn't built till 1971. I moved to Calgary in 1965, and that Spy Hill Valley was empty except it was covered with snow. And at 4:45, I would be there skiing under the streetlights in Northmount Boulevard, and I would ski Monday to Friday. I would skate and pull up, ski down, skate and pull up, ski down. And I would get in 8 hours of skiing every day. And then the next weekend, I'd go to a race, and I would go, first race I was in, 169. Next race, I'm not going to try and win. That's ridiculous. It's not about winning. It's about growth. It's about the fact that you have to hoe the row that has to grow. And so I would race to finish 168. And to the race, 4.5 years later, 169th race, I won the race. I made the national team that spring, and I moved on to the national team, went to the first World Cup race the next year, finished 141st, and started all over again. And eventually brought it down to where I was number one. What did my parents teach me to measure? When I say measuring change, I didn't measure how many races I was in. Think of it. I went 169 races before I had a trophy to put in my mother's trophy case. My mom's trophy case, my dad's trophy case was empty. She had a big china cabinet built because I was going to be an Olympic skier, and there was no trophies in there for 4.5 years. What keeps you going? My dad taught me to measure the heart of commitment, the heart of focus, the heart of the desire to learn, the heart of growth, and the heart of a servant. You see, that last one may seem odd and you might think that it doesn't belong there, but a child that learns to be a servant to help others always believes that he has enough for himself. And I believed I had enough for myself because I learned to serve others, to help others. When can you start? Today. Growth is what we need. But until it becomes what we want, there is little development. I like to play this game with the athletes, and I do this often with the same teams that I do this exercise with. And I end this way with those kids when I do this exercise. Now, I did this myself long before it became famous by Michael Phelps, but how many of you, just by waving, have heard the Michael Phelps story about play the tape? Michael Phelps had a coach, Bill Bowerman, who would turn all the lights off in the swimming pool and make him swim all the distances in the dark. Now, how do you know where you are if the pool is totally dark? The reason why is because Michael Phelps had to memorize how many strokes it took, how long it took, where the wall was, even though he couldn't see it. And people thought Bill Bowerman was crazy. And Michael Phelps bought into this and said, I get it. And sure enough, at the Olympics, he dives in for a 400-meter race, or a 200-meter race, 4 lengths of the pool, and he hits the water and his glasses crack. And by the time he gets to the other end, His glasses are full of water and he can't see. And all he could hear was Bill Bowerman saying in his ear, play the tape. Play the tape. And Michael Phelps kicked off the wall and counted the strokes, 18 strokes to the other end. He knew on the 18th stroke he was going to hit the wall. And by now he can't see a thing. And he does it down again and he turns around and comes back. He can't see a thing. And he wins the gold because he learned to play the tape. And I asked the kids and I asked the parents and I asked the coaches at the end, you have a championship to play. You've got a game to play. Are you playing the tape? Close your eyes and ask yourself, what do you see yourself doing? If you're Blue Line Barry, if you're Great Shot Gary, if you're Peter Puck, if you're Freddie Fast, play the tape. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to play the tape and see yourself doing what you can do to contribute to this team. By the way, I taught coaches to do this same thing with every player they coach and just play the tape. Close your eyes and see that kid playing and ask yourself what emotions you feel most. What emotions are the ones that come to the surface first? Because that's how you see that player. And he will feel that. He will know that, and he will respond to it. And if you don't see him as Fast Freddy, he won't see himself as Fast Freddy. And we teach every kid in the gym, every kid that we trained, we had one line we said every day, maybe 1,000 times a day. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Because if that's what you want, it isn't going where you need to go. And you're not growing, you're stifling your growth. Remember, you can't go where you haven't already been. Thanks, gentlemen. Questions?